There are two sources for this documentary. Firstly, it is based on a secret video footage taken by the Somali Armed Forces while in 1988 they bombarded with heavy artillery and staved with planes the city of Hargeisa. Secondly, it is based on reports from individuals of different ages, gender and profession who survived the total war the military regime waged on the residents of Hargeisa and generally Somaliland. The secret videotape was obtained in the palace of the dictator when the military regime collapsed in January 1991 and the dictator was forced to flee Mogadishu and later the country, ending as a refugee in Nigeria. The footage was taped to inform the dictator, General Mohammed Siad Barre, and other superiors in Mogadishu, like General Mohammed Ali Samatta, how well the armed forces carried out the order of clan cleansing and scorched earth policy of the regime. Of course, the Isab were not the only victims of the regime. Other clans also suffered greatly under the tyranny of the military regime. However, as shown in this documentary, the Isab bore the fullest brunt of the regime's violence when they rebelled against it. The late General Mohammed Siad Barre was the undisputed dictator since 1969 when the armed forces usurped power. General Mohammed Ali Samatta, a former defense minister and vice president, was the prime minister and the leading military strategist when the armed forces indiscriminately bombarded the city of Hargeisa. The men carrying out the order of bombardment on Hargeisa were General Ahmed Warsame Mohammed and his deputy, General Siad Dawood Guled. The regime's order of state violence is illustrated by the words of these two generals in a 1988 meeting at the military headquarters in Hargeisa while clan cleansing and carnage took place. It is from the words of the commanding general, Ahmed Warsame, that we derive the title of this documentary. The words of these two generals and their colleagues bear witness to their intention to flaunt basic human rights and rules of war, including the rights of the wounded, combatants who submit, and civilian population. What they expressed was regime policy, not the cruel actions of forced soldiers. This map shows the geographic location of Somaliland and Somalia. The two territories are in the eastern Horn of Africa. From 1884 to independence in 1960, Somaliland was a British protectorate. During the same period, Somalia was an Italian colony. This is Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland. Since it was founded over 200 years ago, it evolved into a major center of business, administration and culture. It had the first radio station from which the British Broadcasting Corporation, or the BBC, beamed its news reports and cultural events to Somalis everywhere. It was also to this city that Somali poets, singers and composers came from near and far, introducing a new genre of songs and music. After World War II, Hargeisa became a center of political agitation for independence in the British protectorate. The city is surrounded by mountains and crossed by a river that in the past brought camel herders of different clans for water and purchase of provisions in the bustling markets of Hargeisa. The city's landmarks include the two mountains called Nasahablo and two minarets built by Somali workers in Kuwait. The British protectorate was the first to gain independence among the 5 Somali territories to which the colonial scramble of the 19th century had divided. It was in Hargeisa that the Somali flag was first hoisted on June 26, 1960, as the British flag, the Union Jack, was pulled down. Independence and the new flag were received with great fanfare and celebration. 5 days later, on July 1, 1960, the former Italian colony won independence. The Somali flag was hoisted in Mogadishu on the same day, as the Italian flag was pulled down. Independence and the new flag were received with equal fanfare and celebration as in Hargeisa. On the same day, July 1, 1960, the spontaneous unity of Somaliland and Somalia was officially declared. 28 years later, the unity that started with great hope and expectation took a violent turn when the city of Hargeisa, the birthplace of Somali independence, was bombarded by the Somali armed forces in 1988. Moreover, the youth who back in 1960 welcomed independence and unity in the two capital cities with great hope and expectation, now in active middle age in 1988, hurled bombs, steel and hate at one another. The number of people killed, maimed or traumatized by the bombardment is not as visible as the resulting destruction of homes and the razing of the city to the ground. Why did events take this tragic turn? The people of Somaliland were disillusioned with the Union as soon as it was consummated. The two former colonies inherited different legal and administrative systems. One used English, the other Italian. Even the soldiers and police marched differently. In the contest over which colonial system and legacy would dominate the two united republics, the people of Somaliland, who primarily pushed for unity, conceded to Somalia. They accepted Mogadishu in Somalia as the capital city. Somalia's politicians also took the choice posts like president and prime minister. They also occupied the majority of cabinet posts and parliamentary seats. Meanwhile, frustration built up in Somaliland on the inequality of the Union. The people of Somaliland also shared the simmering anger of Somalia's population with clan politics, corruption and ballot rigging that had become rife in the first 9 years of successive civilian administration. By the late 1960s, the need for change was desperately felt all over the country, although no means of peaceful and democratic transition had been developed. Then on October 15, 1969, President Abdirashid Ali Sharmarke was assassinated. 6 days later, the armed forces took power, abolishing the parliament, herding politicians to prison, nationalizing banks and other private concerns. Many believe the armed forces were behind the assassination. When the military regime embarked on reforms like community self-help schemes, road construction, developing small industries, reversing encroaching sand dunes, majority of Somalis in the two former colonies thought that the military coup was God-sent. But the military coup leaders, who promised to return to the barracks as soon as they restored good governance, held on to power, and the self-styled dictator Mohamed Siad Barre never wanted to leave the limelight or give up control of the national helm. Backed by a heavy arsenal of weapons obtained from the former Soviet Union, including tanks and planes, the dictator ruled with iron fist and herded into prison all those suspected of opposing the regime or its socialist rhetoric. Also impressed by how the Soviet Union, China and Northern Korea controlled their people under a rigid socialist system, Mohamed Siad Barre took the most repressive aspects of these countries. Adopting their personality cult, he also had large posters and billboards present his picture and that of Mao and other communist leaders. In the state propaganda pervading society, he therefore became larger than life, a very powerful authority figure to be feared and obeyed. The failure of the regime to deliver on its promises intensified resentment, and the regime reacted with more tyranny. Soon certain clans became target of repression and terror for being anti-revolutionaries. Their members were frequently imprisoned, tortured and summarily executed. The place of summary execution in Hargeisa was called Barka, close to a hill in the outskirts of the city, where 25 soldiers shot a blindfolded victim whose hands and feet were tied. In 1977, Mohammed Siad Barre found an opportunity to deflect public frustration and growing anger at his regime. He invaded Ethiopia following the coup of Ethiopian military officers deposing Emperor Haile Selassie. The invasion was supposed to detract attention from the failed policies of the regime, settle by force a territorial dispute, and reserve for the dictator a special place in Somali history. But that was not to be. The Soviets, who provided arms, training, and advisors to the Somali armed forces, took the side of Ethiopia in the middle of the war. Defeated and humiliated, the dictator was forced to withdraw his forces. The defeat of his forces and destruction of their hardware also made his regime vulnerable to armed opposition at home. Aggravating the dictator's problems, Ethiopia also offered bases for Somalis who took up arms against his regime. The ISAP, following the Machetan, were the second group who took advantage of this offer by forming the Somali National Movement, an armed opposition against his regime. The SNM, as it came to be known, began with an ill-equipped, ill-trained ragtag militia. 3 years later, the SNM became a formidable guerrilla force, limiting the movement of the regime's armed forces outside of the cities without large convoys. Still, the regime's armed forces continue to be among the best organized and best equipped machine in Black Africa. Worried about the Soviets' influence in the region, the United States came to the aid of the dictator, providing him with arms, advisors, and financial assistance. Nonetheless, the regime could not quell the SNM rebellion. Frustrated by its effective guerrilla war, the regime turned its anger and tyranny on the ISAP population in the cities and the countryside. When imprisonment, torture, and summary execution could not quell the armed opposition, the regime took draconian measures against the population, indiscriminately killing even unarmed camel herders in the countryside. In 1987, General Mohammed Saeed Hirsi, known as Morgan, the man who headed the armed forces in Somaliland and the son-in-law of the dictator, ordered in a letter known as the Letter of Death confiscation of all ISAP property, taking over their businesses, displacing them with refugees, and brutal repression of suspected SNM sympathizers. By early 1988, he ordered total war against the population. To carry out this order, soldiers spread out in cities and rural areas, killing innocent people like this family, sparing not even infants. They also carried out other brutal acts, like the dousing of this man, Abdidere, in the town of Gabile with gasoline and burning him alive while he was tied hand and foot. The man who led this operation of brutality is Colonel Yusuf Abdi Ali, known as Tuke. While he subjected the victim to the cruelest and crudest form of execution, the colonel kept the flame alive by spreading burned wood on the body of the victim. Even while this gruesome operation proceeded, the colonel laughed as if he engaged in sport. In addition, Colonel Yusuf Abdi Ali is alleged to have killed over 120 persons and others in groups. It's said that the colonel killed some of the victims by tying them to a truck which, driven at high speed, dragged their bodies on ground, scattering all over their mangled remains. The latter method was used in Somalia by fascists during the Mussolini era. These measures of the military regime escalated to genocide after April 2, 1988, when the two dictators, Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia and General Mohammed Siad Barre, agreed to end activities of liberation movement each supported against the other. When the Mengistu regime ordered the SNM that used Ethiopian bases to cease fighting the Siad Barre regime, the SNM rank and file and officers decided to invade military headquarters in Bur'o and Hargeisa. The response of the regime was indiscriminate bombardment of the two cities, Colonel Awais Gedo, an artillery specialist, describes why and what had happened.
kadib markii muddo badan dagaalkii u socday cadowguna soo galay magaalada waxaa kalifay in madaafiicda aan isticmaalno haddaba qaabka dhismaha madaafiica goobta waxa weeyaan dhowr xeemood baa kooban qaybta xeynta taliska guud xeynta daamurka iyo xeynta airborka masallaha xeemaha waxaa loo kala fiiriyaa hadba noocyada iyo hubka kala yaal isticmaalkooda marka laga soo qaado xeynta taliska waxay ka kooban yihiin noocyada madaafiicda kala ah da' 30 ma 30 105 85 بيام تريديشي iyo biyam 20 هذا كان يكون هاي محدود بقول كوبي بقول 20 يديتشن مليمتر حنت كيتك تلسكا هو تلقو مهمسن هو حنت مصلحة وهي كونت هاي بيام 20 بقول 30 مليمتر هي بيام 16 استعمالها هي حيامه ودن كو تلسك بود كو دامركا iyo masallahaba waajibkan waa kala qaybsan yahay qol walba waajibkii aagi la siiyay inay naafayso ayaa laga doonayaa marka anigu waxa weey inaan waajibka siiyay raahmada waajibkina waa aad kadib ayga inay fuliyaan haddana waxaan filayaa waxa dhawaqa aad maqlayso waa madaafiicii tirada toosan oo bilaabatay kadibna ku kala ku xigi doona ما قطع سالحه كبحي سالحه ايوه كبحي هاي تمدير لا حبو دق ريت
Colonel Abdullahi Sharub led the unit at the Damur and by his words suggests the leaders he wanted to assure on what a good job he and his colleagues were carrying out by bombarding Hargeisa.
sidaas ayaa ilaa maalintii hawsha la bilaabay ilaa maalinka maanta hawsheeda halkaas aan uga fuleynaa meel fiicanna waa noo maraysaa ilaa iyo hadda tan kula hadlayana waa taas weliba taagna waa baxaysaa xabid
Notice the number of artillery shells scattered near every gun. This number of artillery shots and others we do not see were fired on the city of Hargeisa. General Siad Daoud Guled talked to supporters of the regime, including functionaries from Somalia and refugees from Ethiopia. He justified the mayhem and destruction unleashed on the population of Hargeisa. 3 things are most remarkable in this clip. The first is the propaganda which the regime supporters presented as shown by this poster with tired and stale socialist slogans in the midst of death and destruction. The second is the number of educated people, elders and women present in this assembly, showing no outrage on the mayhem. The third is the way General Siad Daoud justifies the genocide. Deflecting responsibility of the regime, he explains it as product of God's will, a predestination that could not be prevented.
شيء واحد بعد لكن مسلوي ومسلوي لا هي إلى ساعة إلى الساعة dadka badan ee ku dhintay Hargeysa gudaheeda baa ayay u qoreen inay sababtaana ku dhintaan saacadaana ku dhintaan sidaana ku dhintaan wixii oo oran lahaa iyo sidaana waxaa inaan ka hortagno taatahay marka ma sugo maanta Hargeysa qofkii joogay wuu arkayaa burburka afooda dadka yaa sidii taallay oo baabaaday inay u baahan tahay maanta maraysa marxalada in dib loo soo yeegleero nolosha
Arda Yusuf Awale is a surviving resident of Hargeisa. She still remembers vividly and with pain her experience of the bombardment on Hargeisa.
lafti ahaantayda shakhsi ahaantayda bil iyo shan iyo toban habeen miyaan ku jiray intii magaalada la garaacayay yaa oonan dhanna uga bixin bil iyo shan iyo toban habeen jaarkaygii ahaa jiiraankaygii way ka qaxeen wax yaroo qadara oo xaafadaha kale ka yimid iyo aniga maalintiina mistijaamaca weyn ee kuweetiga la yidhaa ayaan tegayay ninkii alla ku simo meel walba way kaga dhufatay meel walba way ka duqaysay meel walba way ka dumisay masaajid iyo guri iyo midna umay kala aabayeen islaami sidoodii noolmay dagaalamay waxaad garatay ma meel walba way qayarna bas u fadhiya halkaa ka soo galay halkaa ka soo galo halkaa ka soo kaan anigu u weynayay saddex maqsim bahayd saddexdii maqsim baa sidaas oo kale kan bad aniga ugu fadhiya subax ugu fadhiya iyo maqaadirta weeyay waqti aan dhamaanine aan sidii adshaahiyar ka satigo digada u baxo in yaroo soo qaadan dhexdo gambarkaan ka kacay ilaahay wadiina taa ka kala jeexday barta kuma ka sanay kibir ma qabto nafsan iyo siyay baanahay hormay kugu dhaceen baanay maalintii ku kan guriga aroortii waagii ugu bariyay qolkan arko jabhadu halka maraysa maalmo u yeelay waxaan dhahdaa waryaadhe waxaan dileeyahay anigu dibadda jooga haday tala ay qabsato uu igu dhaco idiga xireeyay iidaas la wuxuu dadka u booliisa qofkii ayda cunaysa meedkii meesha buu qofkii inta aanu buuinba ma ku dhacday ma dhacay ayda kala booliisa yaa waxaan idiga xireeyaa waa dibaddiina iyo cunayay yaa haday ugu dhacdo عاشبا ليش إلهي ويجبد إلهي ويجبد
Chief Chama, a survivor, a clan leader, and a resident of Hargeisa.
waxay ahayd habeen cajaayib habeenkii ilaa laba tobankii markuu badaadku u dhacay wixii markuu waagu beriyey kaare iyo matacuma magaalada markaa waxaa dhimanayay oo dadka markaa madfac iyo kaaruuba ay leynayeen dadkii shicibka ahaa anigu waxaan u soo joogay iyagoo dadka aad moodo in haddii lahay aday dembe isu jiraan tallaabo dadka madfac uu ku dhaca magaalada madfac waxaa lagaga soo ridayay halkan goobtan taaganahay ee warshadda kabista buurta yare saaran baa lagaga soo ridayay waanu arkaynay madaafiicda arrin ka soo dhacayso guriga markuu qaaciisu soo baxayo markaa dadku sidaa loo xaaqayay ugu dhimanayana qiyaas ma leh.
This is Ali Warsaman, a survivor and a businessman.
iigu noogu sii daraa anigu waxaan xasuusanahay markii ay magaaladii inta lagu furay madaafiic oo loo kala aagay wax soo galay wax kala la eegin ayaa annagiina nagu khasabtay xaggii madaafiicdu ku dhacay